Well, welcome, 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 welcome. Welcome to the Golden Scribe, a space for biblical clarity, spiritual formation, and mature faith. I'm Mashani Allen. I am so excited for this series that we have done on Ephesians chapter 4, taking a slow walk through this letter written by Paul to the church of Ephesus. For those of you who are new, we have based this purpose series on the topical encyclopedia's definition of purpose. And I want you to keep this in mind as I go through today's teaching, which is Ephesians 4, verse 15. But what the topical encyclopedia says is in the context of the Bible, purpose refers to the intention or objective behind God's actions. And I generally read three versions of the verse just to give a little more breadth and context and just understanding. And I'm a wordsmith. I love words. So that's what you get. But in the King James Version of Ephesians 4 and 15, it says this: But speaking the truth in love may grow up into him all things, who is the head, even Christ. That same passage in the Amplified Bible says, But speaking the truth in love in all things, both our speech and our lives, expressing his truth, let us grow up in all things into him, following his example, who is the head, Christ. And the Voice translation said, Instead, by truth spoken in love, we are to grow in every way into him, the anointed one, the head. So, what we have been learning over the past few weeks, specifically the last 2 to 3 weeks, I've really been emphasizing verse 4:11, which is the call to the leadership of the body of Christ. And he gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some pastors, some evangelists, and some teachers. And then the reason is for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, and for the edifying of the body of Christ. And as we have continued with verses 13, 14, and now 15, we are seeing what the edification, what the maturity call is, that the leaders which Jesus established in the church are supposed to do, and how it's what it's supposed to produce, what is the purpose, what it's supposed to produce. And we learn here in verse 15 that pure leadership will help the body to speak the truth in love, but also help the body to grow up, which is to mature in the things of Christ. Okay. Now, when we look at the concordance, strong concordance, when it says grow up, it means to cause to grow, to increase, and to become greater. And that is happening in some spaces, but unfortunately, it's not happening in all spaces. And truth be told, I don't even know if all believers know that this is something that's supposed to happen. I'm not trying to be funny, but I don't know if everyone understands their call to the kingdom. I don't know if everyone understands the responsibility that we have when we profess Christ and say that we are Christians, which means Christ-like. But in all of that, maturity is the order of the day. And I really liked what Matthew Henry, and it's another commentary that I looked at, had to say about this verse. So let me share what Matthew Henry had to say about verse 14. I'm sorry, about verse 15. He said that we should speak the truth in love, my God, or follow the truth in love, or be sincere in love to our fellow Christians. While we adhere to the doctrine of Christ, which is the truth, we should live in one love, we should live in love one for another. Love is an excellent thing, but we must be careful to preserve the truth together with it. Truth is an excellent thing, yet it is requisite that we speak it in love and not in contention. Those two should go together, truth and peace. And unfortunately, when I look at the landscape of the church as a whole, you don't see this in operation to the degree that we should. When he says that we should grow up into Christ in all things, into Christ, so as to be more deeply rooted in him in all things, more deeply rooted in him in knowledge, more deeply rooted in him in love, more deeply rooted in him in faith, and all the parts of the new man. We should grow up towards maturity, which is opposed to being children. Those are improving Christians who grow into Christ. The more we grow into an acquaintance with Christ, faith in him, love in him, dependence upon him, the more we shall flourish, or I should say, we should flourish in every grace. He is the head, and we should thus grow that we may thereby honor our head. The Christian's growth tends to the glory of Christ. Now, I know I've been breaking these down by verse, but in this particular portion of the letter, I feel that I need to read verses together to fully grasp, because it's like a comma in all actualities. These aren't full sentences, so they aren't fully grasping the whole concept, which is why I like to at least share it by itself and then bring it together with the other verses so you can see the full scope of what Paul is actually saying. So I'm going to read to you verses 13 to 15, of course, in Amplified. And it reads as follows: Until we all reach oneness in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God, growing spiritually to become a mature believer, reaching to the measure of the fullness of Christ, manifesting his spiritual completeness and exercising our spiritual gifts in unity, so that we are no longer children, spiritually immature, tossed back and forth like ships on a stormy sea, and carried about by every wind of shifting doctrine, by the cunning and trickery of unscrupulous men, by the deceitful scheming of people ready to do anything for personal profit, but speaking the truth in love, in all things, both our speech and our lives expressing his truth. Let us grow up in all things unto him, following his example, who is the head, Christ. What a charge. What a responsibility. What a mandate that we have as believers. And what a charge and what a responsibility does the spiritual C-suite have to help this come about. One thing that one of the study Bibles I was looking at said, without maturity, the truth can be cold and love little more than sentimental. I thought about that when this verse made me think of social media and how so many people are talking and so many people are speaking, and speaking of Christian things, but they are not representing the Christ because there's a lot of coldness and there's a lot of hardness that is coming through the speech and the expression. And even the tone for many of it, for much of it, is not loving. And that's not what this verse says it shouldn't be. This verse says it should be loving. Truth can be given in love, and love can be given in truth. It also said Christians are to be completely yielded and obedient to the Lord's will, subject to his controlling power, and Christ-like in all areas of their lives. It's amazing how, unfortunately, there are people who have been elevated to platforms and influence and notoriety who live their lives compartmentalized, where aspects of their lives do reflect Christ, but other aspects do not. But all areas of our lives, again, we're not talking about perfection, but all areas of our lives should still reflect the one we say we love and we say we serve. Now, in doing my studying, it led me to Galatians 2:20, which says, I have been crucified with Christ. Have you, though? But I'll keep reading the passage. I have been crucified with Christ. That is, in him, I have shared his crucifixion. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith, by adhering to, relying on, and completely trusting in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me. I know I giggled and I smiled, but sometimes we have to take account. And I pose this question, not as a rebuke, but as a marker. Have you been truly crucified with Christ? Are you adhering to, relying on, and completely trusting in Jesus? I remembered I had one more study Bible, but it was actually in my car. And I'm glad I went downstairs to go and get it because I really appreciated what it had to say. It said this: in describing the mature Christian, Paul says that one of the marks is the ability to speak the truth in love. This sounds simple, but many find it very hard to do. Some are fairly good at speaking the truth, but forget to be loving. Some are good at being loving, but have a difficulty being honest with others when the truth is painful. To build up the church, we need both. Speak the truth, but do so in a loving manner. Think of the trouble we would spare ourselves if we follow this practice, especially in our churches. That right there deserves a Selah. That deserves a pause and a consider. Excuse me. But what I also appreciated is when I went to get that particular Bible, that version is the New Living Translation, and I really loved the way Ephesians 4:15 was expressed in this passage. And it says this: instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of his body, the church. And when I read that verse, a question came to me. Who are we modeling or mirroring? I'm going to say that again because I get my R's when there's too many of them. I took speech classes for that. It says, who are we modeling or mirroring? Because unfortunately, I don't know if it's always Christ. Unfortunately, I think some leaders are being modeled and mirrored more than Christ. Unfortunately, I think some doctrines and denominations are being modeled and mirrored more than Christ. Unfortunately, I think some influencers are being modeled and mirrored more than Christ. But the one we should model and the one we should mirror is Christ. And as I was thinking about this, I was reminded of something that I've probably been doing this for about over 10 years now. Because I spent, I think it was 2 to 3 years only reading the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, then I would start over. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, then I would start over. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, then I would start over. And it's not because I had an issue with Paul. I just feel that sometimes we have spent more attention, we paid more attention to Paul than to Jesus. Both of them are necessary, but one is prominent, and that's Christ. And I really wanted to continue to see how Christ modeled the kingdom, how Christ modeled his relationship with the Father, how Christ modeled during ministry, how Christ modeled healing, how Christ modeled love and truth operating hand in hand. And from that, and I don't know if I heard somebody say this or if I coined this myself, but one thing that I do, and it is the posture and the position of my heart when it comes to ministry, that everything I do, I want it to be laced with love. I've had to say some hard things, and I've had to express some uncomfortable things, but so did Jesus. And there was still love laced in all that he did. And that is how I posture and how I position myself. And I pray that this is something that all leaders do. I know that that hasn't been the case, but I'm praying for the fear of the Lord to come upon all leaders in the body, because with his fear comes his love. With his fear and with his reverence comes his love. And what I have always struggled with is that love is the first fruit, and it is the most powerful weapon of all, but it seems to be the least one used. But I pray that the tide is shifting and the tide is changing, and that we come into a greater revelation of who love is, what love does, and why love is so necessary, and why love and truth should go hand in hand. I pray that this teaching blessed you. I pray that it caused you to consider, and I look forward to seeing and spending time going through Ephesians chapter 4 with you next week. You all be blessed.